So visions like these, some darker than others, made real, give us a glimpse of how science fiction can help us imagine the shape of things to come, examining the world as it could be. It gives us a chance to think about our future and whether we're all doomed next year, like that film just said, or not. And that's what tonight is all about. The speakers this evening will give us some thoughts for the future around subjects like the end of the world, the future of energy, God and science fiction, and robot love. After we hear from them, we'll have a short interval, followed by some breakout sessions where you'll get to chew over one of these subjects. Then we'll gather back together for a summary and a chance to get your questions answered by our speakers. But first, I'd like to introduce you to Herb Enmarch-Williams, the chap who's organised the event. Herb.
Now, I'm the one who's going to be responsible for whether you go home tonight thinking that life is bright and hopeful, or whether you actually just want to jump off London Bridge because everything is so terrible like it was in 2012. What we've decided to do is actually find out what your views are of the future. So we're going to do a straw poll, and that's why you've got those handheld gadgets. They're not credit card acceptors. We're not hiring you as waitresses and waiters. We're going to do a brief straw poll to find out actually what you think about the future. Do you believe that we have a bright utopian future ahead of us? Yes or no, or not sure? Okay, 1, 2, 3, vote. Okay, right. So we have 30% saying yes, we have a bright future, 42% saying no, we don't, and 26% saying not sure. We're going to take this poll again at the end of the evening after you've heard from our speakers and had opportunity to discuss the issue. So I'll come back, and meanwhile, I hope that you have a very, very interesting experience. Thank you.
Watch a little more. Okay, as you watch that, that is a corner. That's very near the British Museum. That's Southampton Row. A Hungarian physicist called Llewellyn was standing right there. He had heard later Lord Rutherford, Ernest Rutherford, say, anyone who thinks they can get energy, was from New Zealand, anyone who thinks he can get energy from an atom is talking moonshine. And Szilard was standing there and he remembered what? A science fiction novel called The World Set Free, and a story also by H.G. Wells called The Shape of Things to Come. And as he did that crossing that you see there, the whole of time cracked open. His mind opened up and he said, actually, you know what? We can have nuclear fission. We can build the atom bomb, as Ted Maxwell said. And it was as a result of that walk that he started to think more deeply, went over to the United States, did work towards the chain reaction, and it was Llewellyn who wrote the letter written by Albert Einstein. He co-wrote it, that was sent to Franklin D. Roosevelt. So that place there, Southampton Row, that, talk about dystopian vision. It's where the world cracked open for him in his imagination. He wasn't even sure where he was walking. And it was at that moment, inspired by a science fiction work by H.G. Wells, that he created the atom bomb.
That's Terminator 1. And the thing is that since the beginning of robotics, which was in 1921 with this chap, Carl Chapek, and he invented the word robotics, or robot. He didn't invent the word robotics, that was Asimov. But in his play in 1921, the robots were sort of biochemical entities. You can see them here. That's a poster for it. This is what they look like. Sort of biochemical. They weren't our metal robots. This is from a BBC play, live play, in 1938. This was Rossum's Universal Robots. And in this play, the robots, who were biochemical, decided that they were smarter than humans, so they just killed them all, except for one that could maintain the robots. So they kept them. And then one of the robots got pregnant for some reason that nobody knew. It wasn't a very good play, really. The robot got pregnant. It was a female robot. And they went off, and so we're all from them. We're not real, we're robots. That's essentially what happened. But this was off to a very bad start, because since then, we've had really bad PR with robots.
What would it mean if robots could laugh? Because I do want to follow the robot theme. The second question is, are we, as the smash robots say, a most primitive people? And the last question, really, which I will actually address first, is how dateable is science fiction? I mean, because look at that ad. I looked at other ads from the 70s, a great Hamlet ad with a man trying to get his photograph taken, his hair coming off. There was nothing that dated more than science fiction. I mean, who wants to eat that disgusting freeze-dried, additive-filled cardboard, which was called Smash. I mean, they didn't predict Jamie Oliver or Nouvelle Cuisine or any of these things. So I think science fiction dates much more than any other literary genre, if you like. And when we talk about the dystopias we see today, it's really telling us about now and our current paradigms, our kind of ideologies, and our modes of production. I mean, there's just two other examples of that, very clear ones. You probably heard them before. I won't take a long time talking about them. 1984. Now, I was around in 1984. A lot of you weren't, or you're very young. And it was dominated by the Mac campaign, I think, wasn't it? The launch of the new Macintosh. Orwell wrote set 1984 in 1948. I mean, he transposed the last two numerals, but it's clearly about English socialism, INGSOC, about newspeak and doublethink. These were all issues of post-World War II. Now, HAL, I'm sure most of you know this, HAL is IBM transposed. Just up one letter. And obviously HAL and a lot of our images of Mother in the Alien movies, a lot of our images of computing are drawn from the 1960s, this idea of massive centralization of computing power, a kind of mass production model, top-down control. And nobody, I think, on any of those fictions in the 1960s said I'd have a little computer which I could play stupid Guinness games with on my iPhone or things like that. Nobody predicted that. And so that, I'd say that tells you so really science fiction tells you of the dreams of the future in the past. Because it's part of literature genre, I look at science fiction in a slightly different light. And whenever I see it, I'm not a religious person, I think I probably was, I have a God-shaped hole somewhere, and also, like many people do. But I still think science fiction is one of the ways we address many theological issues. I mean, clearly when you're talking about encountering alien in Ridley Scott movies, it's about a vicious, predatory universe, a mechanical universe, or a slightly more benign idea of the cosmos in something like E.T. or Contact. But I think something even more profound goes on with science fiction rather than other historic, sort of primitive cosmic myths, which they do, that's why they don't date really. In some ways, they are as ancient as there's 5,000-year-old stories of creation myths. They're very concerned about the creature taking over the creator. Now, there's a little bit of this in ancient myth, Prometheus stealing fire, obviously Adam and Eve stealing the apple from the tree of knowledge and defying their creator. But nearly always, the robotic image is the story of a creature, from Frankenstein onwards, all the way to Blade Runner, all this great image is that Noel showed us, is that somehow, because we're no longer creatures of a god, we become creators, and our creatures rebel against us, a bit like Adam and Eve. And I think there's a profound desire in us, because we've lost sort of somebody looking over us, some huge being beyond us. We want a being below us to take over control. We want our creations to become our creators in some bizarre way that humans want both responsibility and to deny it, to have some external force.
I should really be talking about being a robot. I've been a robot for over 20 years, but I've got nothing that I was going to say that has any relationship to robots whatsoever. Because at the moment I'm working on quite a big project about the future of energy, and I kind of felt that was an appropriate thing to talk about here. And since we've all been discussing robots, I think everything I'm going to say is massively inappropriate, but I'll do it very quickly. I was a born and bred petrol head. I loved cars. My brother works in motor racing. But in 2002, I had a ride in this thing. That little kit car is called the T0, and it's a purely electric car. And I didn't drive it. I was allowed to sit in the passenger seat, and it almost broke my neck. It was on a drag strip in Southern California. It did 0 to 60, still does actually, 0 to 60 in 3.5 seconds, which is about the same speed as a Formula One car. It was racing against big muscle cars and big American muscle cars. It beat everything that it went up against, Ferraris, Porsches, Ford Mustangs, everything. They didn't stand a hope. And it was a real pivotal moment in my life. It was a turning point because I suddenly went in a car that didn't make any noise, it didn't burn any fuel, it just went like shit off a shovel, I think is the classic thing. So it was a kind of life-changing moment. So then I came back. Now I used to own the car that's at the top there. It's called the Volkswagen Golf R32. It's a huge, thirsty, ridiculous footballer's car. In fact, my co-presenter on Scrap Heap, Lisa Rogers, said,
The only other person I know who's got that car plays for Man United. And I immediately took it to a Toyota dealership and I traded it in for the car underneath, which is the Toyota Prius. The car at the top, if I drove it carefully, because my brother's friend from Germany had re-chipped it, it would do about 20 miles to the gallon. The car at the bottom, I've done 82.3 miles to the gallon. That's the best I can do. So it was a kind of change of attitude to the way these things work. But what it immediately did, immediately I drove electric cars. I now drive, is it going to be right? I drove one of these. That's a Tesla Roadster. That is the kind of commercial version of the T0. It came out of the same thing. It's powered by 8,431 laptop batteries. That will do 0 to 60 in 3.7 seconds. It's road legal. The showroom's just down the road. It's quite an extraordinary vehicle. They've sold now 2,500 of them around the world. They've done, the maximum range that anyone has done is 314 miles on one charge. They do work. Everything that Top Gear said about them is complete and utter lie, and they're being sued as we speak in the High Court, which is quite interesting. But the thing that happened, as soon as I drove an electric car, I started to become aware about energy, where it comes from, what it really does. Always before that, I'd driven into a petrol station, got out the pump, put it in the thing, didn't even think about it. As soon as I drove an electric car, I thought, hang on, where does that petrol actually come from? It's ridiculous, it's pathetic. I know I should have thought about it more, but it never occurred to me. It never occurred to me the journey that fuel takes before it comes out of the pump, and nor does anyone else. And you can see a commercial anywhere in the world on a big poster, and it will tell you underneath the CO2 emissions from that car. That tells you the last third of that fuel's journey. The last third comes out of the exhaust pipe. The first 2/3 are released and released in terms of cost and in terms of pollution before it even gets to the pump. So it makes you very aware of those things. And this is one of the things about science fiction. Where does energy feature in science fiction? Where energy comes from? It's often not referred to. The flux capacitor in Back to the Future. I love that. It's the flux capacitor. You know, no one knew quite what it did, but if you did 72 point something miles an hour, you went back in time, which is fantastic. I always love that. Now, science fiction, vehicles in science fiction, how do they operate? I mean, this is the car from Blade Runner, which I love that film, but this car takes off with lights and some steam coming out of the bottom. And I was totally convinced, but I'm not actually sure what made it go up in the air. Where's my flying car? Well, there it is, but it's on a string. So it's never been, it's interesting that it's not been discussed. Now, interestingly, this is a really good picture of Red Dwarf, and you can't see it. This is the Jupiter mining vessel, Red Dwarf, and that is powered by a hydrogen ramjet system. So, and it has been referred to once or twice, but I had to ask the writers how the hell Red Dwarf moved. And when I got the explanation, I didn't understand very much of it. But and obviously, Crichton knows completely exactly how it works. But it was interesting. They did refer to it, and they did think about it, and it is based on a certain amount of science. Both the original writers of Red Dwarf come from a science background, and so all the bizarre stories do have a certain element of truth in. But now this is another classic thing of science fiction in the same as Red Dwarf. Red Dwarf is a mining vessel. It's going to distant planets, digging up stuff to burn. And which has never been considered. Maybe that isn't the way forward. And this is a still with lovely Sean Connery from a movie called Outland, which is set on a distant moon where they're mining, and the miners all explode themselves, and there's all sorts of drama and stuff. It's basically a cowboy film set in space. And wind. Wind is marvellous. I love wind turbines. I love wind turbines because they annoy people so much. This is this is a big array in the North Sea. We have 40% of Europe's wind. I quite like that. I think I produce a certain amount of that. Yeah, I personally produce quite a lot of that, especially after a curry. 40% of all the available wind that we could use is around our shores and in this country, and we produce about 2 or 3% of our electricity from wind. Germany has 10% of Europe's wind, and they produce 20% of their current electricity from wind. They bloody work. It could be done. I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not saying it's simple. I'm not saying we're going to do it very quickly. It's not going to be cheap, but it could be done. That we could run our entire country, particularly this country. We're very, very blessed from that point of view. We could do it in the near future without burning anything. We could produce all the energy we need without burning stuff, and that's really all I've got to say. And I wish I'd done some more robot stuff, but thank you for listening.
Thank you. Thanks very much, speakers.